hand over to, first and foremost, our colleague, Professor Stuart Elburn. He's the Pro-Vice Chancellor here at Queen's for the Medical, Health and Life Science faculty. As you can imagine, with a position like his, with great responsibility comes great time pressure, so he needs to run off after that to attend another event. We'll then invite in our colleague, Dr. Lindsay Daw, who is an architect and a lecturer in architectural technology at Ulster University. Despite being a visitor to the campus tonight, I can attest he'd not come here by private jet. After that, we have Sarah Lynch, who is an estates manager in the environmental team here at Queen's. Definitely looking forward to hearing what our team here are doing with our wonderful campus. And last but certainly not least, who needs no introduction, Professor John Barry, who is a professor of green political economy here in our School of History, Anthropology, Philosophy and Politics. A colleague through UCU of myself, an ex-lecturer of mine as well actually, and yes, all around good guy. So if you want to come back in and start to introduce this.
Hi, that's great, Fiona, thank you very much.
Please.
Just say a few words as to the motivation behind this. Well, first of all, we've organised at the university a series of events. Certainly I've organised 10. So there's one every day of the Conference of the Parties, the big climate conference that's happening over in Glasgow. And in fact, if you go on to the Queen's webpage, the main site is all about climate. And indeed, there is a story from our Vice-Chancellor on Monday, and I'm going to refer to in terms of what we're doing here at the university on this issue. I suppose for me, it's partly because it's in my area of research, sustainability, climate, energy transitions. But I do think, and it's also students. I mean, certainly it's staff, and by staff we don't just mean academic staff. I think too often when we think about the university, we think about the lecturers, but what about people in the estates, the cleaners, the gardeners, and so on, so all of the staff, but also students. Because students are concerned about these issues. And I suppose for me as a member of the academic community, which I often see is a global community, we have a global crisis. I don't want to frighten people too much, although as Katie and some of you are doing your modules with me, you'll see that for the first time ever I've put trigger warnings on my modules to give people a heads up that some of the issues that we will discuss can be quite disturbing in terms of the projections, in terms of what may happen in the decades and years ahead. And that to me underscored the severity. I'm not saying there are issues about whether or not that's a good thing to do. Some people think that having a trigger warning will actually bring about the climate anxiety and so on. But for me, there is a responsibility on us as individuals, as lecturers, as teachers, as researchers, but also what is our role as universities? Queen's, like a lot of other universities like EU, Belfast, Met, they are very big organisations that buy a lot of energy, food, use a lot of water, have a big carbon and resource footprint, but at the same time have a lot of capacity to move things. We had an event last night that somebody around, I know Danny and others on community wealth building, about how the university could consider itself as an anchor institution. And in fact, the university here at Queen's, I don't know about UU, has formally recognised itself as an anchor institution in the city. Anchor institution simply means that they ain't going anywhere. It's not like a private company that comes in, makes some money, and then goes away. Anchor institutions like the NHS, like the university, the fire and rescue services, the local council. These organisations are enormous in terms of their procurement budgets. So there's an issue there that we can talk about. What's the role of the university in terms of using our spend in a way that's ecologically friendly and socially inclusive, and we're living up to our values and so on. So for me, tonight is partly due to that particular concern, but also over the last number of years, I've been working with Sarah for quite a number of years, and more recently with Stuart, in terms of trying to push the sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals agenda within the university. And it is, for those of you who've studied sociology, the great Max Weber, he described what we've been through as the slow grinding of hard boards. That's a Max Weber view at modern institutions and how they change it. It's not easy. And that's an issue you may want to discuss. Can we not make things easier to do the right thing? Often it seems that you're pushing a boulder up a hill and so on. But for me, to finish, it is about how do we, as universities, as academics, as staff, as students, view what the university should be doing in the context of the planetary crisis. You know, it's an existential challenge and opportunity that we're facing. Heads up, I'm not expecting anything, you know, major out of COP26 across the water in Glasgow. But other people may disagree. But despite that, we still have a responsibility and we still have capacity to act. And I'm interested in hearing what people who are members of the university community, you can even extend that and say we have stakeholders as well, not just ourselves who are on campus and teaching and learning and so on. So tonight's just hopefully maybe the first of some future events we can have about trying to, you know, understand what many of us think from our different perspectives should be our role. Because many of us are not just academics or members of staff. I have to be honest and say what motivates me a lot of the time is I'm a parent. I've got 2 kids. And I'm studying as an academic the world that's going to come into being for them, and it scares me. And I think for a lot of us, that is something we don't want to go to in terms of we see ourselves as professionals, we're academics, and of course we are. And our job is to produce the best, you know, peer-reviewed science and social science and the best quality education to prepare our young people for what's to come down the line. But my own sense is that this is a unique time in human evolutionary history. And I think we don't recognize the scale and the urgency of what we need to do, but also the excitement. You know, the possibilities of quick, radical transformations in our society, how we heat, how we eat, how we travel. All of these things are all possible. In the same way, just to, you know, anticipate my own contributions later on, the analogy I use is how quickly Britain and America could mobilize all their resources in the Second World War, or almost all their resources in the fight that was a clear and present danger to their societies. We've moved mountains. Things happened that people said couldn't happen, and I think that's the type of example and that sense of urgency, but also hope that we can collectively, you know, come out of this better. So it's not about a grudging acceptance or a grudging sense that, oh, we have a major planetary crisis and we need to respond to it. It is about, we can also fix a lot of other things in our societies as we do that, in terms of it's not just about responding to the planetary crisis, it is about tackling inequality, you know, tackling intersectional injustice. It's about decolonizing as well as decarbonising the curriculum and so on. So anyway, I leave it there. I'm going to hand it over to Stuart. So you're very welcome, Stuart.
John, thank you very much for that great introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. In medicine, health and life sciences, we don't get out much. So it was great to come and talk to some folks who are perhaps not directly from that background. And apologies, because I'm going back to my bunker to talk to some medical students and public healthcare students after this. And what I thought I'd do for about 15 minutes is just share some thoughts. This is not a comprehensive talk, but it's kind of I guess a view of what's happening in the climate and how that impacts society, particularly from a health perspective. In MHLS, we have biological sciences with food and agriculture, nursing and midwifery, medicine, dentistry, and pharmacy. And we've just finished our strategy, and our strapline for that strategy over the next 5 years is that we're going to be looking to make an impact on planetary, public, and personal health, because we need all of those for a flourishing society. And I think there's an important possibility and probability that universities, and particularly this university, can really join those up from the soil, through the food chain, to personal health and public health. I mean, all of those. The pandemic has demonstrated to us, I think, that public health is really important. We've forgotten that as a society. I think we've relearned something around this. Medicine has become precision and personal medicine, but there's something that's really important about public health that we need to relearn, and part of that is climate sustainability. I'm going to show a couple of slides from this report and strongly encourage you to have a look at it. It's recently published about 2 weeks ago. It was a combined effort from the Academy of Medical Sciences and the Royal Society, which really trying to focus on tackling climate from a health perspective. But a couple of introductory slides. As John and I were talking a bit earlier, we need everybody in this game. And I think it's really very interesting that over the past 2 weeks, we've had the Queen, we've had Greta saying almost the same thing. So here's a generational opportunity. And lots of middle-aged men like George who are saying this as well. And I put that there because I do think this is really important. This is a paper from Nature published a couple of weeks ago that George was quoting in The Guardian earlier this week, which really, in a modelling exercise, kind of came to the conclusion that unless we stop burning fossil fuel, we're making marginal impacts around the rest of it, but we've got to stop doing it, and we've got to move to sustainable ways of generating energy. And that quotation, I think, is quite distressing, that really we've got to stop it all very quickly, and all of the kind of manoeuvrings that are going on at COP about let's go down a little bit and we can plant forests and that'll fix it all. Yes, we need to plant forests and we need to do the mitigations, but we've got to stop burning fossil fuels. And that's just a kind of opening line or opening paragraph from this report from the Academy of the Royal Society. And it really says what you all know in this room, but what I want to kind of focus on for a moment is what the conclusion is, that there are substantial opportunities for climate action to benefit human health by evidence, coordinated and equitable strategies across multiple sectors. The theme of this report is we need multidisciplinary approaches to this. And we do need to measure stuff, because if we don't measure, then industry will get away with it. We've got to be able to measure and hold ourselves and society and industry to account around this. Someone at a meeting I was at yesterday used the analogy that the world was in intensive care, ICU, and the only way out was to do three things: to innovate, to collaborate, and to do it urgently. So there's a little kind of nomogram to just keep in your head. We need to innovate, we need to collaborate, and we need to do it really quickly. Again, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but we need to really get on with this. We need to get to a net zero very quickly, because the carbon issues are ahead of us. I really find it difficult to quote our current Prime Minister of these islands, but he does say some striking things. So the comment that we were 5-1 down at half time kind of captures it a little bit. We're really behind the game here. Sadly, I don't think the current Prime Minister is going to do much in the second half that's going to be beneficial, but we need to get on with this because we're behind the game and the planet is heating, as you know. This is just to get you thinking about climate and health for the next couple of slides. This is a really complicated slide from Wellcome Trust, and I'm not going to go through it, you'll be glad to know, but it makes the point that we're living in an ecosystem, and what we do within that ecosystem has consequences for other parts of the ecosystem. The drivers are here: carbon dioxide and methane. Methane probably being a more challenging gas, greenhouse gas, than carbon dioxide. But this is all joined up and is really problematic. And in a slightly more simplified version of this, in the next slide, it just, I think, really brings home this point that temperature's going up because of greenhouse gases. This is leading to a whole bunch of impacts on the soil and in the sea and in the air. And because I'm a medic and kind of have that mindset, what I'm encouraging students to think about is that the air is the lungs, the water the circulation, and the soil is the skin of the earth. And if for any of us we disturb the homeostasis in those three key areas, we die. And that's what's happening to the planet. And I think from a kind of analogy, this works, but it's also, I think, really important when you look at all of these consequences. The consequences for us as a species are an impact on health, because we know that poverty, homelessness, injury, changes in infection, and we're living through a pandemic that is in part driven by climate change, partly by travel and partly by what's happened in terms of the spread of infection in China where it started and then throughout the world. So what do we need to do? Well, I've already said it, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to think hard about methane. Methane is a real problem because some of it comes from the agri sector, and that's not straightforward, but this is a bad gas. And it's not just from animal husbandry, it comes from waste, it comes from oil drilling and other fossil fuel exploration and exploitation. I'm not going to talk at all about the importance of nature-based solutions. They are really important, but today's not the day to talk about that. Some others may address that. We need to preserve our natural carbon sinks, and that's why we've got to work with the rural communities to do that, and have a really engaged conversation around these two particular issues. The issue which I think so far, in my view, has been just tiptoed around, or in fact possibly ignored at COP, is that the south of this planet is in big trouble, and we promised in Copenhagen and in Paris that there would be money from the developed nations to support the poorer countries. That just hasn't happened. We're not doing it in climate, we're not doing it in COVID, and I think we've got to really figure this out. Lastly, I'm just going to comment on this point. 4 or 5 years ago, I thought carbon trading was a really good idea. Now I think it's a real problem because the notion of carbon trading will let countries and industries off the hook, and it really doesn't work. We need to stop burning the fossil fuels, and carbon trading that against planting trees, though it's a kind of nice idea, and we certainly should be planting trees, it is not the answer. So, a few slides on health. I'm really keen that universities really lead on this because I think there's nobody else who's going to do that. And we need to incorporate health into this climate narrative. It's not just the planet's going to be burning, it's we're all going to be at risk in terms of our health and our survival because of it. We need to integrate climate adaptation and mitigation policies, and I'll come to that in a moment. We need to develop metrics for climate measurement, but also to measure how climate change is impacting health. This is going on, and I've been distressed by some of the interviews with our colleagues and friends in the Southern Hemisphere who are really living this already. Health is going down the path. In Africa, the infant mortality is increasing for a whole range of reasons, one of which is climate impact. And just to re-emphasize that promoting transdisciplinary systems approaches to this, I believe, is the only way that we're going to really make an impact. And I think universities have the capacity and the skills to do that. There's no other place where myself as a sort of microbiology clinical doctor would be talking to someone in politics and someone from estates. And now we're all passionate about the same thing, and that recurs across the system. We need a systems approach to this as our own institution and as a society. I've got a bunch of slides now which have a lot on them, and I'm not going to go through them. You can read them in the report. There are just some examples of the importance of incorporating health into the climate narrative. The next speaker is going to, I think, talk about housing. That's really important that we insulate, because that's how we can then use renewable energies much more efficiently. But there's a whole wider agenda around architecture, how we run and build our cities and homes, and that has an effect on health. Power generation, as I said, I think is the most important because that's the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases. And you can see some of the outcomes that have been estimated here, that if we could reduce greenhouse emissions, 7 million life years would be saved over the next 40 years because of just the reduced impact of long-term NO2 exposure. These are the sorts of measurements that we need to get into the narrative, that this is measurable, and if we stop it, we can measure the change that we make. Transport is another very significant contributor to greenhouse gases with CO2. And not only do we improve health because we reduce pollution, but if we can get people walking and cycling, like John and I do, then we start to improve health. A lovely study published just a few months ago really showed that people who cycled every day had about a 40% reduction of mortality compared to an age-matched group. Cycling is a good exercise, and if we could get our cities moving to walking and cycling, that would make a huge impact. I know Nicola Mallon is trying to do that in Belfast, and we need to support her, but it's still very weak. Cycling in Belfast is not pleasant. If you want to go down some sort of back roads, there's some cycle lanes, but we need to really change this. And great to see is it Dublin Road, where they're now taking a lane out for cycling. That's great. We need more of that, not just for the climate, but that will improve the health if people get out and cycle. And finally, diet, and I get into lots of discussions about this with people. Reducing meat consumption in itself is good for our health, but it reduces the methane produced by the cows. Although, to be fair, the majority of methane, or the biggest producer of methane, are dairy cows, because they eat and fart and burp and do all those things much more. But reducing our meat consumption will make a difference to our health, but also to the contribution of greenhouse gases. And these will have measurable health benefits. Sarah will talk a little bit later about some of the initiatives that are going on in the university, so I'm not going to mention those, but I just want to tell you that if you've read the strategy document, we have put sustainability and climate throughout it, and we have very specific mention of this in various parts of the 2030 strategy. And the university is committed to this, and I think you'll have seen over the last number of weeks and months an increasing focus on the importance of sustainability and climate protection. John's already mentioned the importance of the SDGs. Again, I'm not going to spend time on this. Climate action is sort of in the middle of it, but actually all of these SDGs interact with climate impacts, and if we don't start and fix this, we'll be in trouble across all of these to an even greater extent than we are, and we're not starting from a good place, as you know. So just to kind of sum up, this again is taken from Wellcome Trust, and maybe just to mention Wellcome Trust, some of you may not have heard of Wellcome Trust, but it's the biggest funder of research in Europe, or sorry, in these islands after UKRI, and it's made climate as one of its 3 pillars and linking climate to health. So if you're involved in climate research, look at Wellcome Trust as an opportunity for funding. It also has a very strong educational arm, and I think we should be looking at ways of seeking Wellcome Trust support and funding for education of our students, but also of wider society. And they have this nice little notion, which I think is really quite helpful, that we both need to adapt and to mitigate. And again, I'm not going to go through the details of these because you know all of this, but some of our response needs to be adaptation and some mitigation. And again, I think universities and universities working with external stakeholders are in a really strong place to do this. And the conclusion of this report from the Academy of Medical Sciences and Law Society is here. Research funders, led by UK Research and Innovation, should support transdisciplinary systems approaches in research, design and implementation to better understand the complex interaction of climate action, societal well-being and health across all sectors. And as a university, we're committed to this, and I think we'll increasingly see cross-faculty initiatives where we start to look at, can we put groups together to do this systems approach for the climate emergency. Just going to finish with 2 slides. This is on in a week's time. I've got a bit addicted to the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. They've done some excellent stuff on COVID during the pandemic. And their next event is Next Steps in the Fight Against Climate Change, and we'll have a focus on some of the health issues and the global health issues that we've mentioned already today. And I'll finish with a picture that just warms my heart. So this is just a reminder, this is a generational challenge. For those who don't recognise, this is me, this is my daughter, and this is my granddaughter, who was born during the pandemic and has had some early introduction to nature and is holding a fern here. For me, as John said earlier, this is not just for me and not just for you, but it's for the next generation. We do need to fix this for them, or there may not be an earth for them to flourish in. So I will stop there, and happy to take a few questions, and then unfortunately I'll have to jump away.
Thank you for introducing us to your beautiful family. That picture warmed my heart also. Yeah, I got thinking about what our Prime Minister could do to make the second half better. I think substitution, really. Answer that one. Does anybody have
Just substitution.
to retire the team? Does anybody have any questions for Stuart before he has to nip off? Come on ahead.
Sorry, just in terms of like the need for faculty and kind of transdiscipline and discipline research, how well does Queens University itself facilitate those? Is it quite easy to start kind of research projects with other faculties, or is it quite a bit of an opportunity cost to do that?
Okay, so a really good question, and I will reassure, well, I'll tell you first, the next senior managers meeting for the sort of heads of school and senior managers, we're going to deal with this issue, because there's a historical notion that there are some sort of penalties for working across schools or across faculties. That is not the case, and in fact, if we're going to achieve what we've set out in Strategy 2030, as well as actually do some good in the world, we need to start working across faculties. So the 3 faculty PVCs, we've already set up an inter-faculty engagement group, which has not functioned terribly well during the pandemic because we've not had that opportunity to meet, but that's going to be revitalised at a much stronger level and with much more engagement to figure out where are those opportunities. And this report that I showed you, the 3 PVCs have agreed that that's a really good starting point. That's a real call to transdisciplinary work, that no one faculty, no one university, no one country can actually do this. We need to work really collaboratively, and so I think we're going to be trying to figure out from folks like yourselves, how do we do this? Because we're not going to do it top down. We need to facilitate you to do this bottom up, because you know what the questions are better than we do. We can kind of talk at them high level, but what are the questions that we can tackle and deal with, and who are the people that you need working in a multidisciplinary group that can do that?
Thank you for that. I mean, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end, but I just want to put it to the panel. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that before we continue with questions?
No, beyond two people want to come in.
Sure,
Just
of course.
Just to underscore that we are going to need some radically different ways of doing research. I mean, this is like mission-based research. Of that sense of urgency, everything from philosophy to physics is going to be needed. How do we now? We're getting much better at doing that, but you know, we'd be lying as professors here in the university say we have it all worked out and so on. But there is that sense of we have to have a step change and more, you know, engaged research, but also definitely more interdisciplinary research. And the last thing I'd say is that, and not just because it's Stuart and his area of expertise, I think that public health leading on the issue is a fantastic way of framing this whole debate. The health of the planet, the health of our societies, the health of our relationships within societies and so on. I just think it has such a positive way of framing the issue, because we have health and we have illness, and they're very easily way to understand. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It was a great I would just love to reference that you mentioned that everything we need it should be measured, and I would like to mention about measurement. So is Queens looking forward to use any sustainability measures or global tools to measure sustainability? So one of the well-known tools to measure university sustainability is the UI Green metric, and Queens is not still not there, and I am sure that Queens, if they join this metric, they will get a good position because they have been doing great in research, in operations, in teaching, and putting sustainability in teaching and modules, and community outreach and health sector is one of the things. So governance, they have put it in sustainability. So the 5 core domains of sustainability is there. So why could we have it as a tool of measurement? Thank you so much.
I would hope so. I'm not familiar with that tool, much to my shame, and Sarah might know
Yeah.
about it and would probably be better to answer that. But it's one of the details before I hand over to Sarah that Times Higher has introduced has been around sustainability and engagement with the Sustainable Development Goals. And we came, I think, 43rd in the world on that. Now, not all universities are in that, but we see that as one way of benchmarking. The problem with metrics is how people use them, and that's a whole other story, and that's something that I think universities need to help us with, and that's not within my space. That's probably more in John's space. It's how what are the metrics that matter, and I think measuring things in the soil, measuring things in the air, that's what I think about. But we need to measure wider things, and that's into social policy. But we need to bring those all together. But maybe Sarah, you would comment on that.
Yeah, on kind of overall types of metrics, there's a number of them that we get invited to participate in, and then there are some which we do participate in and others that we don't, and sometimes it's just a capacity issue to fill them in and keep up to date with it. So the UI, the international one that you've talked about, Green Metric, we have participated in that previously. I haven't seen any recent communication around it, so it may be that we're not getting the palms on it now, but we'd be very happy to sit down and look at it, because it's a couple of years since we participated in it, and look at it and see, you know, how we might go about doing that. But we automatically get assessed under the People on Planet University League. We also participate in the Northern Ireland benchmarking survey each year, which benchmarks us against all the organisations who participate in that survey. And then we have the Times Higher education impact rankings as well. So there are a number of different ways that we can kind of benchmark ourselves against our peers. But yeah, we're really happy to have a conversation afterwards about looking at UI, the GI metric as well.
Anybody else?
Fiona?
Oh, sorry.
Look at him. Thank you so much for the presentation. That was really, it was really great to see that's where you're thinking of going with this, so much appreciated. But I think on top of the transdisciplinary part of this, I don't know how to get, like on the lecture here, I don't know how to get students, staff, everyone to start thinking about time frames. Because on the one hand, it's like it's urgent and you have to do it now, but on the other hand, you have to think 200 years into the future about the kind of stuff we're doing now, potential impacts. And I kind of wonder how we kind of bring that into the transdisciplinary kind of mission, I guess. Because it seems to be a key part of it.
I think some of that is transdisciplinary education that for our students that. And I'll tell you just and Sarah might correct me on this, but there's a KPI that we've had as a university to try and have all lectures for students within 5 minutes. So what we've ended up doing by that is making it easy for students and for teachers, but actually siloing the university into sections. So AHSS is in one place, EPS in another, and MHLS in another, and we just never meet. And so we need to change something around that, I think, so that we actually it'd be good for us to walk a bit more between lectures or cycle. And we have a fantastic campus. We're nothing more than about 15 to 20 minutes away from anywhere else. So there's a bit of starting to create more of that transdisciplinary friction, not just for academics, but for our students as well. And I think some of that will be rethinking how we deliver education at an operational level, but also at a starting joining classes together, thinking about where are the opportunities. For example, in medicine, we've been starting to do quite a bit of stuff with drama around simulation, and that's been very creative because students who are doing drama are becoming patients in a simulated setting, and teaching our medical students how to deal with really difficult things like suicide. So everybody's learning, but more than that, together we're driving some new and innovative ways, I think, of evidencing, of doing research, and of really changing things.
Yeah, I think there's also something about just the very long-term thinking around this, that it's going to be tricky to kind of make an institution think in terms of 200 and 300-year time frames.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
I think maybe like it's about engaging with philosophy probably a bit more, and not that that's my area, but there must be something around that. I think.
It absolutely is, and policy, politics is the Queen's comment, which I thought was pretty wonderful. Actually, I'm not a royalist at all, but her comment that governments do things for now, but statesmen do it for the next generation. We need to be in that mode of statespeople, that we're thinking not what's good now, but what is going to be good for the next generation, and that does require a longer lens. It is very hard to plan longer than 5 years in these sorts of cycles, but that's because the world has told us that, and that's what business thinks, and so we need to, I think, bring some challenge maybe into those sorts of thinking, and not just in philosophy, but in management, in policy, in politics. I don't know the answer to it, and I'm probably too old to kind of even engage in that. It's kind of your generation and the students coming through that need to be driving that, because it's going to be their earth. My job is, I think, to try and help, support, facilitate, and do whatever we can to make sure you're empowered and energized and have the tools to do that.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Glad this might be a bit of an unfair question for you, but I was at the community wealth building chat last night, which was great, and there was some discussion about the financial models that would be necessary in order to achieve some of the bigger dreams of how to tackle this, and it was recognised and discussed that the neoliberalism capitalism approach really does not gel with what we're all hoping to achieve here. There is an argument to be made that universities have become more like businesses over the last decade or two. Has university recognised that it might actually, or universities, I know that we have the University of Ulster here as well, recognise that actually they perhaps need to step away a little bit more from their business model in that sense? I know we've got the strategy 2030, but are you getting the impression at the top that that is something that's seriously being considered, for the longer term?
So, we take a whole evening on this, and it's really important, but it's how do we fund education, not just further education, but higher education, secondary education, and I think a number of us have different political positions on it. I think we should, for me, the European model is closest to the model that I think works best, where education is the responsibility of the state to deliver it. Where we will go over the next series of governments is very difficult to know. We've sort of got a hybrid in Northern Ireland, which is a bit better than England, but really isn't really all that different. And the costs of educating, costs of research continue to increase. So in some ways, I'm going to kind of push that back on you and say, you guys have to start really engaging in that. Do we want to live in a high tax economy? I think we do, because we use tax to educate, to do health. I think the pandemic has taught us that we do need some central organisation, but none of this is straightforward, because there's lots of people who don't believe that. And that's where, as a democracy, we have to mobilise, and I think it's so important that the next generation mobilise and that you make those decisions, and that old men like me and John and others don't make those decisions, but you do, and I'm not quite sure how you do that. I'm a bit late to this game. John is much more knowledgeable in that, and I think he might have some useful comments on it.
I'm a socialist, so I think the entire neoliberalisation of education, where it's become a commodity, where your ability to pay, not your academic ability, determines whether or not you go to university, has been a disaster. It's reinforced class division. It's robbed our societies of so many innovations. What wonderful inventions have we missed as a society because of the way in which we went down this path? But I think Stuart is quite right, though. What's the alternative? In my view, it has to be a state. States are investing in your education, and it breaks my heart, for example, every year when I see a lot of my students graduate and leave. So it's not just about how we fund education. We've got to create societies where people are willing to stay. I'm not saying you have to stay in the place where you're born and go to education, but there is something about seeing that we should be educating the next generation of citizens, and not simply the next generation of consumers and workers. And I think that's a conversation we need to have within an open and honest conversation. It's like, what's the purpose of education? I think when you commodify education, it means that you have this very instrumental view of what it is. Education stands for its own sake, much like the arts. It's a similar kind of process where we see the arts now has to be justified by how many extra room nights and hotel bookings the Belfast International Arts Festival creates, and so on. I think that is a complete travesty of what the arts and what education stand for. Those, recovery of those intrinsic goods of what education is. It's about, opening your minds to, a pluralism of the ways of the future. But anyway, I think that only serves to me that we need to have a separate session about that element of what it is for the education sector.
I'm not running away from the question.
Thank you, Stuart.
So thank you for having me.
That was an excellent question, thank you. The trade unionist in me was straining my chair. Lizzie, do you have a hand or you?
No, I was going to say, just with regards to that question, I'm going to cover it a little bit in talking about the university campus. So it might answer some questions, but probably raise more than it answers.
Intriguing.
Okay. Firstly, thank you to John for the invitation. I think UCU Queens sponsored this event.
As best we can, yep.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I think I'm here as a representative of Ulster University UCU. Certainly I've tried to cover some of the issues which I think are being talked about within our institution at the minute, some of which will resonate with Queens, I think, and others which are a little bit different. I think also there was a discussion there about the campus, how the campus works, and you'll know the project that we have on to move into the new Belfast Central Campus. It's going to be a very different environment to what you guys are used to here at Queen's, which is a much more established, almost old college type of campus. But what's interesting for me is the message or the structure of the new campus that Ulster University is developing has a certain let's say method behind it. It's something that's the development is very common if you look at a lot of universities across the water in England, maybe the post-92 universities. And the GBD project, which again you might know has had significant problems over the past few years. I think it's 4 years late, it's £126 million over budget. So as a case study of how not to do things, it's one that I use with my students on occasion. I would say I don't have any slides to present. I know with my own students that once I start talking to images, we'd be here till 11 tonight talking about that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit from notes about a paper that I'm trying to put together. So for the 10 minutes, I think, or 15 minutes for this presentation, I really would like to cover 3 things. And I'm really approaching it very much from a critique of the sort of neoliberal university, which maybe goes back to your question, but also how it reflects in the development of the campus, why the campus might look the way it does, are there successes and failures in these new campuses, and how do we measure that? So the 3 things are really the contested position of the contemporary university, how it finds itself. Second is a summary of what campus architecture tells us about the operation of UK higher education and how these buildings come to be the way they are. And the third one is the spatial and pedagogical failings of much of what is being termed sort of the new learning landscapes in higher education. Now there gets to a point where you have to think about, we talk about new learning landscapes, we've been talking about the new ways of working for about the past 20 years, so there comes a point when you have to say, well, when is it new or when is it established? But for the sake of just talking about it, I still refer to sort of new learning landscapes. I'd also say that, be upfront about this and say that part of the story here involves failings in my own profession, which is architecture. Some of those failings are quite impressively critiqued in this book, which is The Architecture of Neoliberalism, How Contemporary Architecture Became an Instrument of Control and Compliance by Douglas Spencer, who I think teaches at the University of Edinburgh, amongst other places. It is a good critique. I based some of my notes on this presentation around what he flags up in that book. I mean, it's much more philosophical than I'm going to go into this evening, you'll be pleased to hear, but certainly what he identifies as the neoliberal university is very much, places itself very much at the interface of technology, the environment and the individual. Particularly, we can see in the expansion of UK higher education over the past sort of 2 decades or 2.5 decades. As in every walk of life, the rapid development of digital technologies over recent years has overturned the traditional delivery of university education, and artificial intelligence now seems to be embedding itself as a tool both within day-to-day administration and longer-term strategies around teaching and learning in UK universities and elsewhere, I'm assuming. Interestingly, the enforced change of teaching delivery during the pandemic over the past 18 months has probably pushed this transition to a more hybrid teaching and learning, they reckon, by about an estimated 5 years. So these changes are probably coming down the line. Between 5 and 10 years people talk about, but it seems that it's on top of us now. I would say as an academic, and Fiona and others might agree with this, John certainly would, we see clear failings in higher education in the neoliberal environment. and the development models it pursues, particularly around campus development, which I'm going to talk about, but in other strategies, maybe policy as well. In that neoliberal environment, the market is lauded as the only mediator and problem solver for higher education in the UK. Amongst trade unions, amongst some academics, obviously there's a critique in that, but you could certainly say within Vice-Chancellor level and senior management teams that idea that the market, and there is no other alternative, holds very much to the fore. But as academics in day-to-day, we actually see the chaos and dysfunction that the market leaves in its wake. But as Douglas Spencer pointed out in that book, to us, by obsessing with the common criticism of the marketisation of education and seeing the student as consumer, we do risk missing the point that the content of education itself has changed in the process of mass consumption. And certainly that link with the university campus and how it develops is probably the most central link that we have. Nowadays, we can't but acknowledge that the central driving force behind the development of the university campus is identification of the newly arrived undergraduate as, quote, the student entrepreneur. And his or her accommodation on every level is at the forefront of university management. In this world, the student in the neoliberal university pursues newly fashionable skills and aims to become practiced in the latest management speak and communication skills. Or perhaps in the longer term, he or she sees their future directed towards the latest government-defined on-trend research centres. This environment in higher education is highly contested and ever more controlled, and it is for these reasons that there has been huge turmoil in UK higher education since 2018. That turmoil is still ongoing and is possibly going to reach another crisis point in the next few weeks. Knowledge for knowledge's sake is seen by some as questionable, and critically, for at least a decade now, the new learning environments and campus spaces have, certainly probably counter-intentionally, played their part in consolidating more limited objectives in higher education and what students can pursue. We have something of a cookie-cutter approach to campus development in the UK. We often note that if it's good enough for one Vice-Chancellor, it seems to be good enough for the majority. A bit of a lack of imagination, shall we say, in how campuses are developed. So how might we critique the neoliberal university campus, and where should we start? To take, for example, 3 measures for assessing the design and development of a new campus or building. Measures put forward, I have to say now, fairly early on in the emergence of the neoliberal university. 3 measures which we might call efficiency, effectiveness and expression, or as I'll maybe refer to it, the 3 E's. Efficiency, as the theorists of the new learning landscape would put forward, looks to a balance of teaching and learning space on campus, but that also includes non-territorial circulation space, something which is very much at the forefront of the new Belfast campus for Ulster University. And you can actually see it in some of these buildings around Queens as well. It's interesting, just coming into this building, that you get a little bit of sense of sort of the new learning environment as you come in downstairs, but then as you move into this part of the building very quickly, it just reverts to basically the standard expectation of a university with lecture theatres and maybe other teaching spaces. So the challenges for Queens as a sort of established campus are very different from Ulster University. A certain flexibility around multifunctional spaces is also considered and factored into the design of the new campuses, and that's certainly the case at the new GBD campus. I mean, this was something I was quite doubtful about, but I have seen it work quite well in other education establishments across the water, or new campus buildings. For example, De Montfort have a couple of new buildings which do work well. Effectiveness, which we might call the second of the 3 E's, looks at a mixture of pragmatic issues for example, legibility and wayfinding around the campus, as well as a mix of building user issues, you know, those day-to-day issues which we all face as staff or students when we use a campus. Of these 3 E's, my own view is that, that over the last decade, certainly the neoliberal university has focused more on the third, which we call namely expression. Expression is what is seen as the public face of the university, whether that's University X or Y. Certainly Queens and Ulster University are very practiced at conveying that idea of expression, whether you call it their unique selling point. But that expression has perhaps become the key issue for the neoliberal university. There might be a reason for that in that the other two, effectiveness and efficiency, are more complex, interlinked, sort of socio-spatial measures, and where the expertise to measure these, analyse them, and make adjustments across a university campus more or less lies outside the majority of most university estates offices. And maybe you'll contradict me on that, prove me wrong. So the third expression, the third of the 3 E's, is seen as a tangible, design-led, competitive asset, and the one that is conveniently photogenic for universities. That is, if you get it right. Often, and I've seen this in my own institution, that expression, or the third of the 3 E's, can be passed to the PR and marketing people. Invariably, the strategy driven by them and rapidly agreed by vice-chancellors involves a shiny new building, and the more funky that building, the better. I would say in themselves as 3 criteria to measure the success of a new campus or new university campus or building, the 3 E's could be valid, but would have to be uncoupled from some of the more egregious or malevolent aspects of the neoliberal university and the objectives of university management. So I'm not saying that those 3 E's of expression, sorry, effectiveness, efficiency and expression are completely invalid, but they would have to be treated differently. And I think part of the argument amongst certainly at Ulster University over the life of the Belfast project has been to try and get a better balance of those 3. How successful we've been, we'll know when we get to move in. Incidentally, I'm always surprised that the vice-chancellors and senior management teams seem to rarely understand the risk of large-scale capital projects. And by that I mean there are always 2 parts to a build project, namely at the beginning the briefing and design stage, and then the construction stage. In the success of a project, each of those carries equal weight, as you would expect. But on the demand side, or what we might call the client's brief, their expectations for a new building, which tends to be from a university, from the corporate body that is the university. And then there is the supply side, which is the nuts and bolts, the time-pressured and budget-focused aspect to construction of a new building or a new campus. What we might call the project management and the construction management. As I say, these carry equal weight, but are very different cultures to operate across. It's almost as if they speak different languages. And one of the discussions I have, or lectures I have with my students in the architecture school in Belfast, is around the role of the architect in being the mediator between those 2 languages. That's something that, in my experience in practice, has been obvious to me for probably 20, 25 years, but I would say is still not really established in the architecture profession, although we seem to be getting there in some shape or form. So the success of a project can be measured on who is able to understand the requirements of both those supply and demand aspects and reconcile the conflicts within them, because I've never come across any project, even small-scale projects, where those conflicts can be quite pronounced. And the individuals who can sort of mediate and communicate across those 2 aspects of construction and the early project briefing stage are really rare individuals indeed. you rarely come across them in project management, but I'm forever hopeful that that's going to get better. So all in all, we shouldn't be surprised at the crisis across universities associated with over-ambitious expansion over the past decade. And we know that that over-ambitious expansion has put real pressures on university budgets. As I say, certainly it's had a big impact on UU to the point where the university has had to go cap in hand to Northern Ireland executive and government here. Okay, what could really compound the failings around these three measures, the three E's I've talked about, is the misguided alignment adopted by university senior management with what they are told are the changing property paradigms. And what I mean by this is that tendency within some estates management, maybe not here at Queens, but we're making space work harder, and there's an example of property management speak coming in, becomes part of the rationale for a deterritorialisation of the campus, particularly with regards to academic office space. So this is something close to my heart, maybe close to John's. Some of my colleagues at UU take this more to heart than maybe I do. And in its place, with that deterritorialisation, in its place, spatially anything goes, where students and staff mix in a glorious communion and teaching and learning serendipity trumps everything. So that's what we're being sold in terms of the new campus at Belfast. Students are being told that as well. I think that's something that they're maybe more relaxed about, but certainly from the academic side and what our expectation is of the new campus is very different. So all of those things about the new dynamics of the space, of course, don't impact on the senior management team suite. You know, they are quite determined, and they've been quite successful in isolating themselves in their own suite with all the privacy and confidentiality that they claim to need. So this radical conception and management of space might work in the world of management consultancy, but it is, I would suggest, counterproductive with aspects of university space and the university campus. So whose voice is actually heard in the development of the campus, and who has some agency? I would suggest that this too is defined by the market. One criticism of UU's approach to the development of the new TBD campus, and remember this has been happening since, I recall, 2012, when it was first mooted and discussed within the university. One of the criticisms has been around the missed opportunity to recognise the urban and local community needs and where the university could have made a transformative impact. Now, I wouldn't say that that has been given up entirely. There are colleagues, I think, John, you know Duncan Morrow, who is rapidly engaged in dealing with the local communities around the new campus in that part of inner North Belfast. But what is maybe surprising generally when we look at these new campuses, that politicians, vice-chancellors and some architects can be convinced to put their faith in what they might see as a flagship building as some sort of community regenerator. Often this can be referred to as an iconic building. But ask yourself, how can it be iconic when it's still in the conception stage? Yeah, I mean, that's jumping the gun just ever so slightly in terms of how we think about buildings and the legacy that they might leave. But this idea of actually putting your faith in a flagship building is a risky strategy unless there is significant targeted outreach that invites those who are traditionally marginalised in politics to become involved. But even at that stage, this will normally happen only after the new campus development is in place. How then should the success of the university campus actually be measured? Certainly not through the manipulable and meaningless metrics around, for example, student satisfaction. For individual universities, networking within cities and regional centres has proved highly effective in parts of Scandinavia, and where economies of scale have had an impact on communities. In this case, the examples I know across the Denmark-Sweden border. The strategy there has been to create a range of effective knowledge communities, the members of which include communities, the wider community I should say, civic bodies, business and universities. But that is a very different model to what we have in the UK, where we have a highly competitive environment within which UK universities operate. So where does this leave universities and the university campus in the climate emergency? Perhaps unsurprisingly, there is much talk at the moment of what's called sustainability leadership. And certainly it's something that has cropped up over the past week on UU's website. I mean, John mentioned Queens. If you go to the UU website, the sustainability strategy is sort of front and centre of what Ulster is communicating at the minute. But there are three areas I would put forward, just thinking about what's happened with our own university over the past sort of 5 to 8 years. Some sort of meaningful change of direction for the university campus. One is that the university focuses its attention by declaring a climate emergency and puts this at the core of its purpose. It should also recognise, though, that this may create conflicts within the strategic development plans of universities. For instance, the push to internationalise the campus or the university against reducing the institution's carbon footprint. So, for example, you know, the infamous Queen's approach of flying in students from China last year, you know, has become a bit of a talking point. The joke is at Ulster we couldn't afford to fly anybody in, so that wasn't going to happen. And at this point, I don't think either Ulster University or Queen's are ready to declare a climate emergency, or maybe, John, you can talk a little bit about that. The second way that universities could maybe approach a new way of looking at being more sustainable is making financial commitments to its civic responsibilities, but importantly not in partnership with corporations and questionable sponsorship deals, but through shaping campus development that really does focus on local community outreach, with measurable outcomes on access to lifelong learning across the widest demographic. And I would to be fair to UU, to be fair to Ulster, that there is, and again Duncan working on this, there is a measure to actually do that with regards to the new place of Ulster University within North Belfast. And thirdly, to commit to social transformation through working with a range of actors in civic society in the promotion and strengthening of democratic inclusivity. This does not mean building relationship with corporations who simply pursue their own agenda, and with regards to the environment tend towards what we would all recognise as various forms of greenwashing. Finally, and I say this as an active member of University and College Union, universities that claim a commitment to reducing poverty as part of the interlinked issues of social and environmental sustainability, but who put their own staff in poverty through casualised contracts, have to do an awful lot better. This is indeed a stain on UK higher education at the moment, and UCU will continue to put pressure on management, I know at Queen's and at UU, and certainly throughout the rest of the UK, for the abolition of casualised employment. Similarly, with commitments to social equality, the nationally gender pay gap in the UK academia sits at 15.9% between what is paid on average between women and men. And the pay gap for our BAME colleagues sits at 9% across the UK. And to my mind, none of that is sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Will we wait till the end to do questions? Or yeah, okay, so Sarah, come on ahead.
It's on the desktop, Sarah.
We covered the desktop now. Thanks, John.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay. Thanks a million, everybody. My name is Sarah Lynch, and I am the environmental manager here at Queen's, and I'm based in the Estates Directorate. And it's really lovely to see a number of familiar faces, both staff and students from Queen's here that I've had the pleasure of working along with. and some who will never met virtually, so Colette, it's nice to meet you in person. So I'm going to give you an overview of some of the things that we've been doing here at Queen's to tackle the climate emergency. But my focus isn't so much on what we have been doing, what we need to do, because I think, you know, it's all great slapping ourselves in the back and saying what a great job we've done, but actually the big hill is ahead and we've done the easy stuff so far. So it's a bit of an insight really, not maybe to the solutions, but some of the things that we need to address and get our heads around to get in there. Going the wrong way. Yep, there we go. And I suppose having worked at Queen's for 11 years now, having studied here a number of years previous to that, one of the things that I really was kind of trying to think about when I was developing this talk was what are the roles of universities and what should we be doing in response to the planetary emergency. And this quote is something that I picked up on a sustainable development an SDG report around education and sustainability, and it was originally in French, and I did GCSE Irish, so I wasn't going to attempt to do the French tonight. But it is important not merely to foresee the future, but to bring it about, and I think that's really important as universities. We're not here just to do the research to tell everybody what's going to happen, but that we are also part of the solutions, both nationally, globally, and in our local communities. And that really ties in with the whole vision that Queen's has. So if you don't know, we have a Vision 2020. We've had it for a number of years now, and the key bit that I always take from this is the last couple of words there, which is that we are focused on the needs of society, that we're here to solve the problems, to solve the issues that will make society better for everybody, which links right in then to why we really need to be taking action on climate change and leading at that point. So just a bit of an overview as to where Queen's is, because most of you will know here because you've managed to find the Lanyon building in the main site, but actually we have got quite a big spread across South Belfast. And we're also based in Titanic Quarter. We also have a lab down the Port of Ferry, and we have playing fields on Malone Road. So we've got about 250 buildings, and most of them are covered within 3 conservation zones, which has its own challenges when it comes to developing and retrofitting those buildings. We have a whole then community living within those buildings. We've got 22,000 students, we've got 4,200 staff, and we also then have our local community. And I think that's really important when we talk about Queen's, that we don't talk about it from an estate's perspective as just a whole load of group of buildings that we have to manage, but that we talk about the people who use those buildings, the people who live in our local area, the business users. We're all a community, and we all collectively have an impact. You can't draw a line and say this is only where the impact for Queen's starts and this is where it finishes. And as I say, I've been working at Queen's now for 11 years, kind of banging the carbon management drum. But it's really, as John will tell you, in the last couple of years that we've really seen a lot of traction and a lot of movement in this area. And it's been for a couple of reasons. We've had the IPC report that was getting so much more publicity. We've had Greta, we've had David Attenborough. There's been so much more publicity about climate change. And alongside that, we also had the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we had then Theresa May's commitment to net zero by 2050.
And the Queen.
And the Queen, now we have the Queen as well to add to that. So from that perspective, that has really raised the profile within Queen's on the need to take action. But more importantly, and this I think has probably been more important than having those grand strategies, is that we have a whole community here at Queen's. Our staff, our students, our local community, our stakeholders, as John mentioned, who are all asking us what are we doing around climate change. So instead of me knocking the door and trying to get people talking about this, people are coming from all sorts of different departments, including procurement, to say, I'm here represented here today, to say either what are we doing, or what are we doing, and how can I help, and how can I be part of this, because change needs to happen. We've had the student climate strikes. We have our own Green New Deal, which has come from the SU, which is brilliant and has been a really great tool for moving things forward again, and just that wider expectation. And so we weren't just starting this journey from zero, as it were, from now. We have been working on this for about 10 years, but it's been the easy things that we've done so far. So about 10 years ago, we set a strategy to reduce our carbon emissions by 21% by 2020. And that was focused on the emissions associated with the buildings that we use, so our electricity, our gas, and our oil. And we have implemented various strategies and spent £10 million across the campus over the last 10 years to do that. And we delivered on that target. And that's good, because it shows that there's commitment there within the university to fund that. Moving on from that then, we now have Strategy 2030, which Stuart alluded to. And within that, we have some very brave commitments in comparison to what we had before. We have a commitment to embrace the UN Sustainable Development Goals across all our activities. We have a commitment to transition to a net zero society. And on Monday there, we had a press release and a story on the Queen's website, which commits us to investing multi-millions of pounds into sustainability. So there are lots of high-level commitments that are now being made by very senior people in the university. But that's all very well, and it's all great for them to make all those commitments, but it comes down to some other people in the university now to try and work out, well, how the heck are we actually going to get there, and how are we going to get there at the speed that we need to make any significant dent or change and a contribution that the university should be making. So we know that we have significant carbon emissions around our fuel and electricity. Those are known measurements that we have. The big challenge is the stuff that we don't know. And we talk about that being the elephant in the room, because we're not really sure what the figure is, which makes it even more difficult for us as a university then to work out how do we actually tackle that. And whilst business travel hasn't been a big issue in recent months and last year, it's been one of the positives, if you can take a positive out of all this pandemic. We know that it's not going to take very long. You can already sense it around the university that activity is returning to normal. So what will that be like in the future? And if you had looked at that pre-pandemic, the business travel, the commuter travel emissions, and the procurement far, far outweighed anything associated, like the emissions that we were having on campus. So the campus bit and what we do here directly is the easy bit. The hard bit is the bit that we have less control over. So some of the things that we have been doing, we have invested 10 million in the last 10 years. We have, done some work around travel. What we can do around travel. There's lots of challenges around that because we can't change our cycling infrastructure overnight. We can't change our public transport, which is pretty antiquated. But we have got things in there that we have been trying to do. We have a wonderful new bike club that I'll talk about a wee bit later. We've been doing things around recycling and waste management. We've been trying to enhance biodiversity. From a procurement perspective, we assess environmental performance of our suppliers at contract stage, and we have a new supply chain code of conduct. But those are all, those aren't even kind of the tip of the iceberg of what we need to do. There's so much more that we need to look at and that we need to understand. And it's really like it's a wicked problem. It's difficult to measure. Business travel, what we buy, even the embodied carbon of our buildings, the carbon associated with our food on campus, those are all things that are really difficult to measure. The solutions to addressing those are not straightforward. Think about retrofitting this whole campus to pull out all the gas boilers. It just, the mind boggles as to how are we actually going to do that. What new technology is actually going to be coming down the line. We don't have a crystal ball. And there's a big thing too around changing mindsets and behaviours, even within the people that we're working with on a day-to-day basis. Our engineers within our estates directorate are very fixated on needing to see this line where we have net zero, and we have where we are, and it'll go down a nice straight line, and they'll just know that this is when this will happen, because that's the way their mind works. But we know that the solution to net zero is not going to be like that. It's going to be a mixture of lots of different things thrown in. So that's a challenge in itself, trying to work with your colleagues and trying to get them to understand that this is not, we cannot go use the ways we have normally worked to deliver these solutions. And then we have offsetting, because that's the answer to all our problems, not, and trying to help people understand why we just can't, pay somebody in on the internet to plant a load of trees, and that will, make us all feel better about our carbon emissions. And then kind of going back to some of the stuff Lindsay was mentioning, the conflict of what our business need is as a university. So we have made commitments in Strategy 2030 that we want to be net zero, but we also know that we want to increase substantially our international numbers. We're opening new campuses in China, in Dubai. Those all conflict with, on this talk of a global campus. A global campus requires people traveling all around the world, creating lots of carbon emissions. So it's not a straightforward issue to address. And then we have the growth in our estate. So we have just signed up to CityD, which is 3 amazing projects that will be great for the economy, but 3 potential new buildings using more energy, with more embodied carbon, with more people travelling to them. And rather than reduce our carbon emissions, they're going to drive them up. So those are all the things that make it a really difficult thing to address as a university, but which we need to respond to. And the response, from my perspective, needs to come from the Queen's community. This won't be estates, building a nice fancy new retrofit system across the university. It won't be procurement coming up with a nice fancy tool to address their supply chain. It needs to come with the whole community pulling together, and that's our teaching, so that we're building it into our curriculum, so that we have the citizens of tomorrow who are going into their jobs aware and climate literate and building it into their employability skills. It needs to be built, working with our researchers, tapping into the expertise that we have and bringing those onto our, it's dread to say the word working group, but all that transdisciplinary research and working that Stuart was talking about earlier, looking at in our operations, and also not forgetting the boundaries of Queens do not stop at the car park, that we need to work with our partners through Belfast City Council, through good work that's already being done through stuff that Augustina Archer is doing with Department for Communities, all that different outreach work, all of that needs to come together in our response to climate change at the university. So how do we get there? Well, we need to understand our baseline. We need to put some numbers to those question marks that are there so we can prioritise some of those impacts. We need to change what we can now, and we are starting to do that. So within estates, we're building that into some of our policies already, and I'll talk a wee bit more about the Riddle Hall job and the strategy that we have there to address that. But we also obviously need to plan for the future. We need to, as I said, open our mind to new solutions. The old ways aren't going to work, and we need different ways of working and work with different types of people, and to find those solutions and get out of our silos, which we're really great at staying in within universities in particular. Work in partnership and empower our people to educate and raise awareness. This quote from Albert Einstein I thought was quite good. We cannot solve the problems we have created with the same thinking we used in creating them. So some of the solutions that we have been coming up with recently. So Riddle Hall, which is at the top of Stranmillis Road, is going to be our beautiful new Harvard-esque business school. And it is built on top of a Sherwood sandstone group aquifer. And I won't claim to know a lot about that, but if Joe Ireland was here today, who's a PhD student and very passionate about geothermal, he could give you a whole lecture on geothermal and why it's so important. But where we are located in Belfast has huge potential for geothermal, and when we were looking at Riddle Hall and we were looking at the energy strategy, it was around the time that everybody was starting to talk net zero. and it was a bit of a wake-up call. You know, this is a brand new building. We can't put gas in here. Gas is traditionally what we would do. It's the go-to. There's still, you know, places in Northern Ireland that are dying to get gas, even though we'll be ripping their boilers out in about 5 years' time. So it was trying to find an alternative, and geothermal was the option that we went for here. So there are 40 wells across the base of the site, which will heat the Riddle Hall, the new business school. And whilst it's not the biggest in Ireland, it's one of the most significant in Ireland. And yeah, Joe Ireland is the expert on it, but it is an example of where we've had to just, you know, stop in the middle of a design and go, right, we need to actually have another think about that. From a travel perspective, we've been trying for many years to get a cycle hub set up at the university. So we really want to try and increase access to cycling. So we've trying to improve our infrastructure, but by on campus, by also increasing that for our students. So we've just opened up our new bike hub in the level 1 of the admin building, and it's a partnership with Big Loot Bikes from the Turnaround Project. And Big Loot Bikes refurb the bikes for us. They're provide maintenance service, but they're also leasing out the bikes to students. But one of the really important parts of this project as well is that they support transition of people into the justice system into employment. So it's a social enterprise with a really good positive social impact to it. We could have employed a commercial operator to come in and do this, but it was really important to us that we had Big Loot and social enterprise doing that. One of the other key things that we're trying to do at the moment is empower our community. So making people feel part of the solution and be part of the solution. And Natural Built Environment, Noah's here from Natural Built Environments, kind of kicked this all off with carbon literacy training a couple of years ago. But working with Will McGarry from Natural Built Environment, we've now developed a programme to deliver carbon literacy to 400 students in the second semester as a pilot project in partnership with Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. That's an accredited carbon literacy certificate that they will get out of that. And alongside that as well, we've been working on a module covering the SDGs along with John and Amanda Slevin that could potentially then be provided to all first year students. So it's trying to embed that knowledge from undergrad, first year undergrad, to take that with them through the university, life at university, but onto their employment to be better, so we are getting better graduates, better citizens. One of the other programs we've been looking at is the LEAF program, and Colette's here today from pharmacy. He's one of our pilot participants in that. And that's really to try and embed good sustainability practices within our labs. Because actually when we look at our energy usage and our power usage across the university, our labs are the greatest area for that. So trying to embed those good behaviours, starting off with some pilots in the areas that we know we've got the biggest problems around our Faculty of Medicine. And another programme that we've been delivering is our Environmental Leadership Programme, which is all about developing sustainability skills within our students, and then that's Degree Plus accredited. So there are loads more things that we could be doing. This is a taster of what we have been doing. And one of the other areas that we've been working on, which has been a really lovely project and is an example of how we've been trying to pull together with the community, is the Lennox Vale Tree Nursery. So it's an example of how just having a random conversation with somebody can really develop and grow into a really lovely, worthwhile project. So you'll know that within Queens, sometimes the relationship with our residents and our students, and even with the university and our residents, isn't always such a positive one. But this is one that we've really been able to build a really good relationship with them. And when Eileen from the San Souci Residents Association came forward with this idea, having had a conversation with conservation volunteers, we were a wee bit nervous about it, going into an agreement with the Residents Association. but it has been a really, really lovely project to work on. So what we've done on a patch of land on the Malone Road is set aside an area where we've built with the residents and with students a number of beds where we've planted out seeds which have come from Beaver Park Forest, so some of the most ancient trees in Belfast, I'm told. And now those trees have grown into small saplings, and we'll be planting those across the estate, and that's something that we hope to continue. But the nursery itself isn't managed by Queens, it's managed by the residents and managed by our students. And another really great project that we hope to build and have more of is our Elms Village allotment. So Stuart was talking about nature-based solutions being really important. Well, actually the nature-based solutions, those small scale that we've been doing, have also been really, really great projects for involving our students. And Laura Walsh, I don't know if you're in the photos there, Laura, has been one of the students who've actually been instrumental in getting this up and running and making it happen and maintaining it and keeping it going over the last 2 or 3 years. And that's something that we want to see more of and find more spaces to do that on campus. And they've been growing fruit and veg up in our accommodation now for the last 2 years. And one of the things I'm really keen to progress and kind of formalise is a proper programme at the university, because we've really only been dabbling in it, but some of the American universities in particular are really good at doing this, is using the estate and the community as a living lab. Now we do it to some degree. I keep looking at Nola because I know that like Augustina and different people in Galway are doing some really great projects where they're working with local communities and linking it up to their research. But we've got loads of potential to use the estate to do that. So test out new technologies in our buildings for retrofitting projects, involve the students so that they get a sense of what those retrofit projects mean, because they're going to be the skills that are needed for the future. So to date we've had people in looking at our combined heat power and linking that in with the curriculum and their degree. We have Joe Ireland doing a test project up in the Ashby around geothermal. And looking at new ways of using geothermal to store heat, which can be then used as another time. And we've been working with School of Biological Sciences to get them to actually assess our biodiversity on campus and make recommendations as to how we can improve that. And then there are all sorts of other ways that we're collaborating across the university, and I think with local communities and with statutory agencies and stakeholders. And as I said again, climate change doesn't know any bounds. We do need to work together and find different solutions. And we've had some really useful discussions already with like the Belfast Million Trees project in Belfast. We're part of the All Ireland Pollinator Network. We've just become part of an All Ireland Green Lab network, which we've been involved in a funding bid for. And there are other networks there that I'm probably not even aware of, but are all trying to work together to create solutions for the climate crisis. So I'm going to stop talking now and take a breath. But from my perspective, the response in the universities and response to the climate emergency needs to be a community response, the university as a community, which needs a whole lot of very enthusiastic and energised people who really understand that this is something that really, really matters. And I always love the Lorax and Dr. Seuss, and it's a popular book in the house of my kids. But when I was looking at when it was printed, it was 1971. And it's like Dr. Seuss got this in 1971, and still now we're still having to convince people of the need to take action to protect our environment. But hopefully, everybody in here cares a whole awful lot, and we can make progress and make a difference. Thank you.
While I'm getting set up, if you want to stand up and stretch, you've been sitting there for quite some time.
Come on, stand up and stretch.
No. So I'd like to know that I'm going to try and be as quick as I can, because you've been very patient. I'm going to offer something quite different in the sense of a kind of big picture, a sense of frustration, impatience. We move quicker and faster. We should absolutely take everything that Sarah and Stuart and indeed Lindsay was saying about what we need to do, but we need to move much, much quicker. I don't know why this is not moving on. It's stuck. It is something that has to be quick. The first slide I have is to remind you that there's a climate march on Saturday. So there is going to be a feeder parade at 11 o'clock outside the main gates for students to meet the main march at 12 in St Anne's Square. But I think for me, the reality is that we need to move beyond business as usual. How can we as a university, as educators, indeed as students, as learners in our procurement practices, our on-site operations, the world is on fire, and yet while we're making these baby steps in the right direction, and I absolutely applaud them, it's a bit like individual action will not result in the changes that we need. Sorry, Boris, giving people £5,000 for a heat pump just ain't going to cut it. We are on track to heat the world by almost 3 degrees. The plan is supposed to be keep it to 1.5. We're just above 1.1 at the moment. And already in Ireland, for goodness sake, Ireland, we had issued last year in July this year, our very first amber heat warning. Quickly followed then by flash floods in Belfast. This is going to be the pattern that's going ahead. We've had the declarations of emergencies by various bodies, from the Assembly to the British Parliament, the Irish Parliament, and yet we don't see any action. We've had the UN declare code red for humanity, and yet still we're arguing in these kind of small scale ways. It's almost like there's a war happening, and we're sitting down discussing how it is we're going to respond to this. So for me, I have a deep sense of impatience with the slow pace of change. That we have smart people in the university. What bit of a climate crisis do they not get? What bit of a planetary emergency do we not get? Why is it we aren't seeing the large-scale mobilization of all the intellectual resources of this university, including our students, to figure out what it is that we can do? So one thing I would like to propose, if people are interested, feel free to contact me. We need to have a bigger discussion on this as a community about what is our role and responsibility. It seems to me that you have code red for humanity, the planet's on fire, we've had multiple declarations of emergencies, and we're making baby steps towards the types of changes that we need. And indeed, for those of us who are academics, should we not now move from publications to protest as part of our responsibility at this time, facing an existential crisis? I cannot see what is the issue with the university not publicly declaring a climate and ecological emergency. It's like recognizing gravity. What is the issue? Our Vice-Chancellor, if you read the statement he put out on Monday, does say the climate crisis and emergency, but that's not the headline issue. And in a way, I can kind of understand that. And I think we are, as a community, getting to grips with what that might actually mean. However, if you look at our Strategy 2030 document, in the context of a climate emergency, we're rivet-popping the life-supporting systems of the planet, we're cooking the earth, and our plan up to 2030 has very little beyond the recognition of the SDGs, beyond some vague recognition of ourselves as a civic university, but it's all about internationalization, research impact, how much money we can bring in, blah, blah, blah. To paraphrase Greta Thunberg. It's simply not good enough. It's like Edwin Poots's climate change bill. Several years late and many megatons of carbon over budget. So we need to change Stuart's 3 things he said, which was whatever, innovate, collaborate, and urgency. I want to propose we need to educate ourselves on this issue. We need to agitate, and we need to organise. Because you can tell with my voice, partly because I want to keep you awake because it's late in the evening, is that we need to demand better. We deserve and demand so much better. What do we want to be in terms of Luna's question of the long-term frame? I want to be a good ancestor. I want my kids and grandkids, if I'm looking up the hat, to look back and say, you know what? Granddad was a bit of a gobshite, really bad taste in clothes, but he stood up and was counted. How come we, as academics in particular, as senior academics with tenure and security and the knowledge that we're going to crash into a wall, and we're looking out the window and we're fiddling around with the temperature controls and so on, not looking ahead? We have a moral responsibility as academics with the knowledge that we have. We are a civic university paid out of the public tax money. Our job is to keep our society safe as we can, give our knowledge as best we can, and stand up and stand out. It is simply not sufficient now to continue with the business as this is not even with the neoliberal model that Lindsay was talking about, but simply continuing in our normal patterns when we're facing an emergency, a crisis. Again, which bit of emergency and crisis is not landing with senior management, or indeed many of my academic colleagues? I often feel like the lunatic in the room at meetings where I'm talking about this issue, and some of my colleagues will look and say, there goes Johnny. Like the feckin' Lorax, you know, speaking for the trees and so on. Why am I not the adult in the room telling the truth about how bad it is if we don't change now, the multiple opportunities that are available right here, right now, if we start making these changes? Why is it we are not inviting in community groups, protest groups, those who are interested in this on the campus, facilitate discussions about how we can help each other? Because that's one thing that we all agree with Sarah in terms of the partnership and Stuart talking about the same issue. We're all in this together. My view is, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, this is wartime mobilization. We need to mobilize all our resources in society to face this clear and present danger. I ain't seeing this. I'm not feeling it. We're getting kind of management speak responses. Oh, we'll set up a committee to look at that. Again, how is that commensurate with an emergency and a crisis? Is that the reason why we're reticent as an organisation to declare an emergency? Because then we have to do something about it in terms of what are we doing. And I think we do have a lot of great things to tell. And none of this should be taken as critical of what colleagues are doing within the constraints of a neoliberal university, within a very competitive environment, with a very standard orthodox business model of increasing internationalization, students, research grant income, and so on. So for me, I'm coming to the end of my tether, folks. I have been gently trying to work within our existing system, trying as best I can to bring my passion, my knowledge, my big, thick Dublin accent, wherever it may land. But I'm not getting a lot of love back. I'm getting some, don't get me wrong. But why should it take such effort to get such modest returns? So for me, I think we've started a journey, we've made great steps in the right direction. I think we have the preconditions for a paradigm shift or something better, but it's going to take you, staff, students, to mobilize. If you want something different, we're going to have to agitate for it. We're going to have to organize for it. certainly use the existing processes of trying to influence change. But I tell you right here and right now, on a grander scale, COP ain't gonna fix it. And by the way, as I keep telling journalists who are contacting me, I've never been so popular, I'm an overnight success after 35 years. I keep telling the journalists when they ring me, just like a puppy is not just for Christmas, climate is not just for COP. That's the danger. All the media attention and then it goes away. So I do think there's something around mobilizing the passion and particularly the values of our students. How can we live the values of what our students want? Those who are going to be the educators of the future, the entrepreneurs, the policymakers, and so on. So for me, I would propose, and I'm more than happy, and there have been some discussions within UCU about, because I'm the environmental rep for our local branch here, to convene a general meeting such as this, but to have, this is the issue. What do people think? I'm pretty clear that we, particularly at the senior academic level, we need to be getting into communities to bring this knowledge to them, because a lot of communities are kind of wakening up. Climate's a big issue. Jesus, the Queen has said it, so it must be serious, or David Attenborough, and so on. But then trying to figure out, well, what do we do? And I think we need to have a different way of, you know, spreading our knowledge. Absolutely. Peer-reviewed science, social science, we need. My own view, I don't think the world needs another peer-reviewed article from Professor John Barry. I've said all what I want to say. I'm like a broken record. I haven't changed appreciably in my views in over 30 years. I'm like a stop clock. I tell the right time twice a day. Well, I was right when it was Thatcher, and I'm right now in terms of what's happening with the planetary crisis. But I do think, just to finish, then we can have a bit of discussion, partly because my PowerPoint is broken. I'm sure, I wonder if somebody in senior management is controlling it. It's really just to go back to that issue. Which bit of an emergency and crisis do you not get? How will you feel looking back that we were complicit, us being silent, not feeling the passion that I'm expressing here tonight? I'm a citizen, I'm a father, I'm an academic, I'm an activist. I'm not saying everybody shares that. But where are we in this space? I think we're far too polite often in the modern world of simply, you know, almost like taking a ticket, we make our vote, and then we sit down. And the system, well, we'll get back to you, we'll get back to you. That ain't going to work, folks. On a larger scale, we are going to need non-violent direct action. Nothing beyond that has ever shifted appreciably paradigms. That's how you stand up against injustice. What the suffragettes did, what the civil rights movement did, in terms of challenging the existing paradigm. Certainly work within it as best you can. Gandhi, Martin Luther King, they're the models. Strikes, the strike action by the young people for the climate strike, that's what made the space for the British Parliament to declare a climate and ecological emergency. It was that action on the ground. We're going to need something similar here on campus. We are the university. We are the university. Yes, there's buildings, there's estates, there's procurement, and so on. But we're living, breathing, feeling people. And I think one thing that I don't think we do often enough is to talk about the emotional impact. I mentioned a moment ago about putting trigger warnings on my student guide. I get depressed, angry, cry, and fearful of the future on a daily basis. And I don't think I'm unique. I may have it in an exaggerated form because of the nature of my work. But I do think we have to have an open and honest conversation with ourselves about what it is we want as staff, as students from this university, without denigrating, as I say, anything that we've achieved so far. But mother of God, it is so radically insufficient. It's like describing the planetary crisis to somebody and then giving them a light bulb or a recycling bag. It just isn't going to work. But even more than that, it stops the bigger changes being considered. Because you think that I'm doing my bit, and that's okay. So here endeth the secular sermon. In terms of the time frame issue, and I speak now as a completely collapsed Catholic, not even a lapsed one, you've got to think like the Catholic Church in terms of centuries, or the seventh generation thinking of indigenous peoples. Be a good ancestor, but you have to act now in order to claim that you want to be a good ancestor in the future. And to finish with a lovely quote from Alice Walker, some of you may know, activism is the rent we should be paying for living on this planet. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, John. Any questions? Where do we start? Come on ahead.
I'm not an academic. I'm a
Real person.
semi-retired doctor.
Me neither.
I'm very pleased to hear you say we're too polite. You're the smart guys. You're the intelligentsia of our society, the influencers. But I'm just wondering, who are we trying to influence, and where can you, as the academia, best use your ability to influence? Because my personal view is chasing the leaders these days is different to chasing the leaders in the past, where the leaders controlled their societies. Now society controls the leadership. The leadership are totally responding to what the populace want. And I see a terrible apathy amongst people on the ground. They're all looking for somebody else to sort it out. And as long as that happens, the leadership are powerless. So somehow I feel we need to be influencing everybody. And what we have to do, as you say, don't be so polite, we have to say, you're all going to have to do with a bit less. Consume less, have less nice things, have less holidays, and we touch on the flights and all this sort of stuff. But actually, it's just the stuff that we buy at Christmas, the presents, the dining out, all the stuff, the luxuries. You're going to have to start going without people. But it's the people we need to convince somehow. And I wonder where the sociology, the psychologists, the clever people in this university that feel that we can start to influence the public. Social media clearly is the big platform that unfortunately is just rent with craziness. But that's where people take their influence now, unfortunately, instead of proper leadership. That's my thoughts.
Well, I think we need to do some internal work. We cannot lead until we have divested from fossil fuels. How can we credibly say anything on this issue when we ourselves are invested in the very thing that's causing the planetary crisis? My own pension, which we're going to vote strike about, the results are out from the ballots tonight in terms of strike action. But my own pension is invested in fossil fuels, though there was a legal case now in England to try and do that. So I think there's an internal conversation which I think should be open and democratic. I also think we should be co-creating modules with students. What types of things do they want to learn? Because I think we're not equipping them for the world that's emerging. I'd probably slightly reframe what you've said. Nobody ever in history rioted for austerity. Nobody ever rioted or made challenges for less things. And to me, it's a false framing of the issue. Because that's how Greens are often presented as the teetotaler at the party. Don't be drinking, don't be eating with red meat. It's what are we losing now? What are we to gain in moving to a less frantic society, a more localized, secure society in which we have less inequality, where we can have the things that we need to get. This is going back to the community welfare discussion we had yesterday. To me, it's about what we're losing now. It's not what we have to sacrifice. I think our lives are too frantic. I think there's obligatory consumerism, almost. People are locked into, internal combustion engine-based transportation, which they don't necessarily want to do. And so, for this is an example. To me, for Northern Ireland, if you want to get people behind this, it's not about saying you must go vegan, otherwise that's Sammy Wilson saying we're going to eat insect burgers and so on. It is about how we have to demonstrate to people there are multiple benefits of changing to this way of life. Not just because of the planetary crisis, and the one I'm fond of using, partly as a result of the work we did on the Belfast Climate Commission, is housing retrofit. If we retrofit people's houses, they benefit in multiple ways. More money in their pocket, their health is better, they're out of fuel poverty, and we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. They're the types of policies we need to start promoting. Because if you go down the road of sacrifice and a carbon tax is going to be regressive, I think you lose people. But I do think we need to have this conversation in terms of, you know, what type of society we want to bring into being. I mean, what type of university we want to be. I mean, it's not old, you know, without vision the people perish. We have no vision. What we have is a naive assumption that the climate crisis is like some other policy challenge. It isn't. We're talking about rivet popping the life-supporting systems of the planet and calling it progress. The pandemic is not somehow a separate crisis to the climate and the ecological crisis. It's an intrinsic part of it. You know, encroaching on wilderness areas, releasing pathogens that human beings have never come up against before. I mean, I am staggered that colleagues of mine, now I'm not going to make any you know, views on students, but colleagues, smart people, you want to say, what the fuck? What the absolute fuck are you doing? Are you reading the science? Are you reading that on every measure of the life-supporting systems of this planet, we are going in the wrong direction? And yet we are gaily going around our daily routine and back into the semester, and we're doing the same thing, and so on. It is that eponymous story of the, you know, the frog in the boiling water. Oh, it's getting a bit warm. Turn it up a bit. I mean, I'm absolutely staggered at that. Do people who maybe don't feel as intensely as I do in the university, and I never really had this conversation with college, so maybe I need to, that are we thinking like this? I just find it absolutely staggering. That we're sleepwalking into a disaster because of fear of being impolite, because of fear of trying something new, because of fear of challenging ingrained habits, because of fear of status, and that people might snigger and laugh at you, and so on. That's how any change in history always happens, with a few people who are willing to say, like the young child in that story, Emperor, you've no feckin' clothes.
Yeah.
We all say, you've no feckin' clothes. That should be our chant at some event that we may have to engage in. We need to you know, repurpose that horrible right-wing Brexit slogan, take back control. We are the university, whether it's staff and students or our taxes that pay for this place. Are we feeling that we're well served by this? This is your taxes working for you, by the way. Anyway, let's see if Sarah or Lindsay has anything else to say on
Well, John. I mean, like, totally, I agree with John, and like, having worked at Queens for like the length of time I've been working at it, having studied here, you know, you've been banging your head against a brick wall, and now all of a sudden people are starting to wake up and they're starting to talk the language, but it's all talk, and really there's been a lot of messaging and bold statements made, but we've yet to see anything follow through, and that's a frustration for me working within estates, because we are chomping at the bit, because we know we need to do this, but when you're working, you can only work within the constraints that you're working. You can't make money up here, you can't make your senior managers sign off on things. A lot of the stuff that we do that's even small scale, we just do, we don't ask permission anymore. It's easier to ask forgiveness. So, you know, even those small scale things we go ahead and we do because we know that they're the right thing to do, and that they're a small project that we can use to evidence to build and do more and show and connect up with other pieces. But yeah, I think though I think policy has a massive part to play in it. I know even sitting within the university, and we're trying to get more people. We don't want people driving here. We want people to be getting the bus, to be cycling. But it's really hard to deliver those messages when it's like, you know, I wouldn't cycle in Belfast. I wouldn't go out on a bike with my child in Belfast, because I think somebody might as well call a social worker. Like, it's madness. You know, it's a danger. So you need to be better connected up with the policy. But as a university, I don't think we're particularly strong in using our role to do that. And we've been trying to do a wee bit of work with natural environment and Department for Infrastructure, but we're just like small scale compared to the power that a university should have and being able to influence that change. and the influence we have with the number of students that we have at the university, and the power we could be wielding with TransLink and our public transport provider. I think we need to shift the game when it comes to being able to use in our role as a anchor institution and a civic partner to make those policy changes happen that will make people less resistant to any changes, the changes that we need.
I mean, the situation at UU is probably not dissimilar in terms of where senior management lead or don't lead. I think what has been quite interesting is that the GBD campus has been a bit of a catalyst to sort of generate discussion around more to do with not the technical aspects of the building, because one of the things that we've been quite critical of is that building was conceived 2012. We're now nearly 9 years later. So the technology within the building, as far as I know, is not sort of up at the cutting edge of where it could be. I mean, that's just an outcome of the project. But there's been a lot of discussion at UU about the impact of 15,000 students moving into town, plus the staff who have to get to the campus. And I know colleagues have been doing a lot of work in relation to travel and transport to the campus. And what's been interesting in some of the forums that I've sat in on is that some of the people who you would have expected to be quite resistant to some of the fact. I mean, well, some of you might know Jordanstown. You can go and park 3,000 cars there, no problem. There's never any chance that you'll not get a parking space. And we were concerned that obviously coming into Belfast, the shift for some people would be too much, and some people were saying, that's it, I'm finished, I'm going to take early retirement. But in some of the forums that we've had, people have been much more positive about that. They recognise the challenge of reducing their carbon footprint in their day-to-day living. So that's been positive actually, and something that we weren't really expecting. But as I say, from a technical point of view, the new GBD campus, because of the delay in it, probably could be, in terms of its technology, could be a little bit more advanced.
Thank you. That answer your question? Do you have anything you want to come back with?
Yeah, very useful contribution, but again, I come back to how you as a university can have an influence in the whole thing. I mean, it's all very well to keep your garden tidy, but actually the people that I service as a doctor out there don't care about the university. They don't even, you're a bunch of intellectual snobs. That's just a reality. They don't care. You don't exist as far as they're concerned. But you are the smart people, so you should be able, on a better level, to somehow influence, be that the state of emergency. Banging a drum, not sure about protests, but if that's what works, I don't know. But I'd like to see the brain power of the university in some shape or form being brought to the table to influence people. But I think it's the public you need to be influencing, not necessarily the leadership, because I think leadership are important. But yeah, I take on board what you're saying.
Just out of interest, do you have any ideas yourself as to how you would influence if protests aren't the way you would go?
I don't have the answer to this, which is part of why I'm here.
Sure.
To see what way you guys are thinking about it, because I don't know, unfortunately social media seems to be the great platform for discussion and debate, and it's so random and bizarre that you just can't hold out any hope that there'll be a coordinated response. I think the state of emergency actually might be something in that, because that's the headline I saw when I was attracted to coming to the talk, and there may be some merit in the academics are now panicking. They're saying your house is on fire, and instead of all the nicey, don't really want to upset you here, folks, but the fire. Say, the place is about to come down.
Exactly.
And we're too nice, too polite, too afraid of offending people. My job has been paralysed as a GP because I can't tell people what's going on in their lives for fear of offending them and drawing a complaint, because everybody's empowered to complain. So actually a lot of people aren't getting the treatment they need.
Yes.
We've paralysed ourselves as a society. So I don't have the answer. So I'm just, that's what I see happening, and I feel quite impotent as a population, as a member of society, that we can do anything about this, which is not right. Because I've got kids as well, and I'm thinking, what on earth, I saw this coming, why did I bring them into the world? Because I almost think we're in the last deck.
The last couple of sentences you said there is exactly how I feel as well. I
Thank
really
you.
understand that.
Thank you for saying that.
And
It's
actually,
really easy to say.
I'm going to be careful what I say here, but I thought the pandemic actually might be the Earth self-modulating itself, but only we were too smart for that one. But again, that was a small bunch of people who got the solution for everybody by inventing a vaccine. It doesn't work with planetary overconsumption.
I think it's encouraging though, I'm not an academic, just a lowly temporary member of staff. But it's encouraging, like, obviously hearing from people within the university as well that, you know, we really do need to do something, and I think it's quite important bringing in all the community that you are here to say that you're basically going, where is your leadership?
Yeah.
You know, where are you in this? And like, the people who are waking up to it in the wider community are going, wait a minute, where are the leaders in this? Where are the people showing us how to kind of come together and act? So I think that's really important.
I wouldn't want to be a leader with social media in the state it is, because it's almost impossible to have any sort of sensible opinion without being just ripped to shreds by all the experts out there.
But this is
Maybe
why we
they
do more
are.
face to face.
Yeah.
Reach out to your local community.
Make this a weekly thing.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes, go ahead.
I'm in final year marine biology, and some of the stuff I've been reading, been taught by my lecturers is incredibly depressing. We've got huge amounts of methane hydrates stuck in the deep sea sediment, and our first idea is to go and drill it and try and get it out, which is happening right now. People are looking for licenses to go drilling, taking this methane out, and let's just burn it and keep going. You destabilize that. You send all this methane, we're done. You can't undo that. And my final year project is on educating secondary school children on climate change. And when I do my research on this, and then I'm doing what I'm doing in my classes, and I'm thinking, it's so much worse than we know. It is so much worse. And I'm coming from a very pessimistic look at it as well, with the targets that we have and the work that's being done and how the climate works. Part of me is of the opinion it's just too late. And I don't want to say that to them, but I also don't want to lie. And it's a really tricky balance to walk, because once you start going down the road of this is how serious it is, the first response from people is just, well, what's the point? Oh, what's the point? Why should we bother doing anything anyway if it's all completely hopeless? So it's putting that, not lying, but putting that positive spin. And I just don't know how to do that, because that's part of my research project is educating a few secondary school classes on climate change, specifically deep sea, but climate change in general. And I just wondered, any advice? How do you walk that line? How do you tell them the truth, but don't send them off on a path of thinking, well, what's the point? My future's fucked. You know, I was wondering how you do that.
I'll send you my final third year module that some of the students in the class are taking on Earth, Energy, Ethics and Economy. I like my alliteration, as you can tell. And it's an arc of talking about the problems at the start, and then we end up with hope at the end, because we have to respect people and to tell the truth. And that's what I like about Extinction Rebellion, at least our first two claims. Tell the truth about how bad things are. And that's why I am not optimistic, but I am hopeful. And I'll explain the difference. Optimism is what abounds in the majority of the thinking in this university, in the majority in politics, in the media. And it's basically that Elon Musk will sort it, him and his penis-shaped spaceships going up into the lower atmosphere. A technology will come along, geoengineering will solve it. So there's this optimism that a technology will come along, or the state or some entrepreneur will come along. That is naive and very, very risky. It also robs us of our agency. Because if it's too late, and that apocalyptic sense is, well, as you say, what's the point in doing anything? There's no sense of agency. It's that Gerard Manley Hopkins poem, eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. And we don't want to leave people with that. So for me, what makes me hopeful is hope is generated through activism, through agency, through educating ourselves and working and sharing our concerns. I think we have to recognise demonstrable levels of eco and climate anxiety and fear within our younger population. And let's be honest about it, about the emotional impact. It doesn't come easy to academics, particularly male academics at professorial level, to express their emotional impact. I can tell you, I know some climate scientists who for decades have been drilling the ice cores, doing the analysis, and basically saying to the government, listen, there you go, it's getting worse. It's worse than it was last year. And they are clinically depressed. They are clinically depressed, but they cannot find the medium in which to express this publicly. As you can tell, I'm much more comfortable with basically outlining my intellectual, my political, and my emotional connection with this. That's what a big deal it is for me. But I think I'm rather unique in that way. And I just wish there was more people like me who were coming out and saying, we're really scared. But you know what, folks? We have solutions. And they ain't in technology. We have all the technologies right here, right now to solve this. What it requires moving beyond capitalism, beyond consumerism, beyond an unequal society that we have, and we have to get political. I am not interested, as I said at an event the other night, of biofueling the Hummer. That somehow we have a plug-and-play version of the future. We just take out the bad carbon energy and we stick in private corporate-owned renewable energy and bada bing, bada boom. That ain't going to work. We are talking about the changes in our society that's the equivalent, not even of the wartime mobilisation I mentioned a moment ago. That's a great way of getting people going. It's the equivalent of when we shifted from feudalism to capitalism 250 years ago. That's the scale. Everything's going to have to change. Everything in our lives. And we are only dimly even beginning to understand that. Personally, I think Johnson gets it, but he can't say it. I think a lot of our leaders know this, but they are almost fearful that, oh, the public, as you said, the public aren't willing. I can tell you, I think there's an appetite in the public for this. But they do need to be engaged and mobilised around this, and in a hopeful way that, you know, as somebody points in that famous, you know, cartoon about climate change, and it's a meeting of a scientist, and a guy in a white coat shouts, he says, well, what if climate change is a hoax and we create a better world for nothing? What we have to gain here is not just around climate, we're fixing lots of other things. That our people can be secure, safe, well fed, better health, but it may mean things like we have to fly less, have a more plant-based diet. You know, our fundamental liberties and so on will still be maintained. Because my deep, deep fear is not that we won't make the transition to a low-carbon, sustainable society, but that will be unjust. It'll be a tremendous human suffering, including if things get really bad, in terms of we begin to see a 2-degree, 2.5-degree world and so on, people will be willing to sacrifice their civil liberties because things will get that bad. As the great Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt said, the cry for bread is always issued with one voice. What she meant by that is democracy is about pluralism, diversity, debate. But when there's a struggle for survival, you don't need democracy. Democracy is not necessary, folks, for human survival. What we want to avoid is getting to a point where it's survival or barbarism, because that way lies authoritarianism. And that's my big, big fear. Human beings we're like cockroaches, we're pretty resilient. There will be bands of people that will survive even a thermonuclear, you know, blast across the planet. But all the great stuff we created in this period that we're now leaving, just to get a little bit more technical, I think we have to end soon before the cleaners come in or winding up the clock. We're leaving the period of geological grace called the Holocene. It was an 11,000 year period when the Earth's temperature enabled all the stuff we learned about in history. The Greeks, the Aztecs, the Industrial Revolution, all happened in this period of climate stability. We are now leaving that and we're now entering what's called the Anthropocene, a new geological, climate destabilized era. That's the scale of what it's not even a historical, this is an evolutionary shift we're now going into. And you know what? The planet doesn't give a shit about us. That's why it really annoys me as some of my students know when I see these placards, save the planet. The Earth has seen 5 other great mass extinction events, where up to 90% of all life disappeared, and the Earth will just shrug us off like a bath coat, and life will come back, but it just won't be habitable for human beings. So that's what it's not about saving the Earth, it's saving a habitable planet for us and our civilizations, and all the things we created, democracy, our culture, maybe not so the Jeremy Kyle show or, you know, some other, you know, maybe some Netflix programs aren't particularly great, but, you know, all those things we've created, they are all at risk now in terms of, you know, us not acting quick enough and standing up and standing out. For those of us who have privilege, I'm protected because I'm a male, white professor. You can't get more privileged. I am short and I have an Irish accent, so I don't know if that takes away. But those of us who are privileged is what I'm calling out for. Members of my professoriate sections of the university, well paid, perhaps coming towards retirement, that's the best time because all bets are off. What are they going to do to me? I can understand younger academics who have to, you know, get their career and so on. So my particular, if you like, point is to my fellow professors. Where are you? Where are you? Sorry, Antri, last question before we have to head off.
It wasn't actually so much a question, more a comment, because you put the question, you know, what is to be done?
That's Lennon.
I just want to share my thoughts on that, because ever since before Brexit, I've been racking my brain how to build a social movement, because obviously it's already been seen and the way politics have been going. But also having worked on peace walls, for example, for 2 years, everybody was incredibly negative about it. Nobody thought change is going to come about. Whereas I was coming from a point of view as having come through a peaceful revolution in East Germany, yes, change can happen, you know. I was the only person that was positive. And it didn't matter whether I was talking to community reps, to civil servants, to academics. Some people had ideas, but, you know, in a quiet space, they all said, it's not going to happen, you know. So I was really surprised about the level of negativity that I've experienced. I've also been a community development worker for 20 years, and we've talked about the level of apathy. Where does it come from? Where is the hopelessness coming from? I have been questioning myself that. And it is really, and it doesn't matter, even people in academia, why are they just continuing, you know, with business as usual? Because none of us actually believe that we can affect change as an individual. I don't think looking towards leadership is going to make a difference. But there are some things that have been mentioned here in the room, which is about, you know, the broader education that is needed, the community-based education that's needed. And if you're looking at the university, go and ask the majority of students, what is their motivation to study? Is it to become educators, or is it to become good at the job that they want to do, or get the job in the first place? Are they more career focused, or is it about really education? I think that's an important question. And in that, I think as well, there was something mentioned about transdisciplinary work, absolutely essential. Where are the social scientists, where are the psychologists? But also, I think cross-sectoral working is really important. This conversation that we're having here, we should be having with community representatives, because they probably will tell you that the people they're working with, they don't care about climate change. As it was said yesterday by Sean, I think, you know, people are more concerned about the end of the week rather than the end of the world. And it really, really stuck with me, and I think that's really important as well. So, transdisciplinary conversations, cross-sectoral conversations, conversations with community people, and how do we build a social movement? I look back at what happened in East Germany. I went to a pre-Brexit rally in Belfast, and I think it was led by the Lions outside the City Hall. And I thought, well, that was great. The turnout wasn't not so great. And I thought, now what you need to do, I kind of realized what actually happened. It's not good enough to strike once or to have a rally once. you need to do it again and again. And what happened in East Germany, they did it on a weekly basis. They did it every Monday and every week. There was more people joining, more people joining. You're building a movement, you build momentum. More people become educated, because when you all stand on the street, you have those conversations. And you as an academic will have a conversation with somebody who's maybe really, how could I say, from a disadvantaged background. They're not going to be wanting to be in a room with you and feel that they're being preached to, because their issues are so different. But if everybody is in the same space, and the common ground is there, the common ground is that we all want a better future, but it's actually getting the people in the same space to have those conversations in the first place. And I think it's about building that momentum, but it's also finding a space where you can have those conversations with people from completely different sectors and backgrounds, personal backgrounds as well. So that's my deep thoughts.
That's how Greta Thunberg started. One girl outside the Swedish Parliament. I think the pandemic has interrupted that growing sense of momentum. You know, this is connected to Black Lives Matter, it's connected to Me Too, it's connected to decolonization. All of these things are connected together. And I think, again, partly because I am a proud trade unionist, those older social movements still have a role. Where are the trade unions in this? There ain't no jobs on a dead planet. So we do need to start linking up. Where are the faith communities? So if you're interested, I have tomorrow at 12 o'clock, there'll be an event on about faith communities in the planetary crisis. So it's about seeing where all these different sectors come together. But, you know, for me, I think we have to mobilize people out of a sense of the urgency and get that fire of injustice. You know, people's lives do not have to be so blighted. You know,
but I don't think they see I don't really believe that ordinary people see the connection between their daily reality and how that relates to climate or to politics. Because actually what we have been doing also is we have personalized those socioeconomic problems. We have personalized poor educational standards. It's their own fault for being poorly educated. It's not the problem of the educational system that has actually failed them. So it's those kind of issues. Everybody feels that it's their own doing or not doing that they are where they are, rather than a systematic failure that it has been. So, yeah.
And that explains why I think we'll have to leave it here now, that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. You know, we've reached a stage in our society we can't even mention the word capitalism is seen as somehow suspect. It's the system we live in. It's a cancerous, ecocidal system. Let's call it out for what it is. Roll up our sleeves as best we can, and let's get to work. So I hope this is not the only conversation we'll have around this, but I'll let you finish up.
No, how do you say anything else, you know, other than just thank you for coming tonight? And yes, go out and talk to your communities, talk to your families, talk to your friends, share the message, anything you've learned tonight.
And remember, educate, agitate, organise. Thank you.